Hello, everyone. How exciting it is to be here with all of you, and hi to all the remote folks as well. We're really excited to talk to you today about how we're keeping customers at the heart of Monzo in the context of growth and as the company is scaling.
So a little bit about us. Layla is, as we mentioned, a senior user researcher in our team. And she's not only excellent at the quality of the research that she does and the robustness of the data, but also turning that data into really impactful stories. And it's been such a pleasure watching her at work and seeing the impact that she has on the product, but also on how we deepen our knowledge base as a research team.
She's very kind, isn't she? And Saskia is our amazing research ops lead. So at Monzo, Saskia has totally transformed the way that we do research. And she's taken some really complex, unwieldy, messy processes and systems and turned them into something so much more straightforward with such calm. And she is also very good at a lot of the things I'm not so good at. So we complement each other quite well.
We're a good team, yeah. So a little bit about Monzo, those of you who don't know. So we were founded in 2015 in the UK as a prepaid spending card. But in 2017, we got our full banking license. And today, we're the 7th largest bank in the UK, if you look at customer numbers, offering both personal banking and business banking services. And our mission is to make money work for everyone.
So since our inception, Monzo was founded on this idea of going out and speaking to people and figuring out what wasn't working with their current way of banking and building a product that met those financial needs. And this customer centricity has resulted in a brand that a lot of our customers really love. We've got a consistently high NPS score and really strong network effects too. So 2/3 of Monzo customers say they open an account because someone told them to. But we're experiencing quite significant growth. So in 6 years, we've gone from having 240,000 customers back in 2017 to today having well over 8 million retail customers, as well as over 300,000 business banking customers as well.
And with that kind of business growth comes, obviously, team growth as well. So you can see in a few years, we've gone from an overall design organization of 20 people with just a few researchers to today, this is already out of date, I think, being a design team of nearly 60 with nearly 20 researchers within that. And there comes, obviously, challenges when you've got this kind of team growth. But for us as researchers, the key challenge really is, how do we maintain this customer centricity that we were founded on in this context of scale?
So we think as researchers, we're probably quite uniquely positioned to bring that customer focus to the heart of every product team. But to maximize the impact we can have in doing that, we try and do these 3 things. So we try and prioritize our time and the things that researchers do and don't work on. We try and get maximum value out of the research we have and make sure we're engaging people with the insights. And we also unblock and empower non-researchers to do their own research through a self-serve program.
On the whole, this approach works really, really well. But we've learned a few things that we'd like to share with you on these 3 themes that maybe you can learn from our experience. So the first thing is that self-serve research doesn't actually save you much time at first as a research team. So when we've got this legacy of having customer centricity, and in parallel with that, we have this tradition of enabling non-researchers to do their own research, as you can see from this blog post from 4 years ago. And so I spent the first year of my time at Monzo really focusing on making the research setup process a lot simpler and more streamlined. From onboarding new tooling to making sure that we have really clear how-to guides for every part of the process that everyone can find. We've got templates and also Slack workflows to support all of the processes that automatically loop in all the different teams that need to be involved. And office hours. So anyone who's doing research can book in time with a researcher to talk about their research project and get some feedback or support. But even with all of this, it wasn't enough.
Yeah, so we'll tell you a couple of examples of where this hasn't worked so well. So recently, we had a project manager join Monzo, and the first feature that they were working on, it was deprioritized for a researcher to work on because it was quite limited in scope. But still, being a great PM, they wanted to get some insights to steer the direction of the team. So they booked into one of these office hours, and we suggested that they should run a survey. We pointed them to all of our how-to guides, we gave them access to all the tools that they needed, and we wrote them a step-by-step personalized checklist of everything they needed to do. But they actually found this really overwhelming. and really hard to balance with all the other commitments that they had. And what we found was that actually we hadn't done a very good job of setting their expectations up front of how long this process was going to take them, all the steps that were involved, all the tools they were going to have to use. And that's not even considering the time and the skill it takes to actually craft a good survey. But a few weeks later, we had a different experience where a product designer wanted to do some concept testing for some concepts they were working on. So we had a session to talk through a research plan. We went through their discussion guide, and they just had 15 minutes with Saskia to clarify some of the recruitment processes. And from there, everything went super smoothly, and they did it independently without a hitch. So why the inconsistency? Why did that go so well when the survey example did not?
So if we take a little bit of a sideways step, when you're cooking or making a meal, how many of you like to follow a recipe and maybe get all the ingredients out, chop everything up, prepare it beforehand before you get started? Show of hands. How many of you prefer to freestyle it a little bit? Maybe you just take some inspiration and then you swap ingredients, you make it up as you go. Okay, why are there these differences in how we cook? What's behind this?
So we think it's probably a combination of things. It's probably your levels of skill and your experience, but also maybe your confidence levels, and also just your general personality and your approach to things. So you can have lots of experience with cooking, and maybe you've been making dinner for years, but you can still prefer to have that step-by-step recipe to follow.
And we think the same thing applies to non-researchers doing research. We realized we need to take the time to really understand how much experience someone has in doing research before. Also, the context. Have they been involved in research at Monzo? Do they understand how it happens here? And then what is their general attitude and personality like? What are their preferences? How comfortable would they be doing something themselves? And related to that, how much time do they have? Can they actually do it? Do they have the capacity for it? As a research team who are research enablers, we need to play a bigger role in evaluating this on a case-by-case basis and then tailoring the support that we offer our team members before even asking them to do a self-serve research project.
Yeah, so like the designer that we were telling you about, they'd been at Monzo for about 18 months, and they'd observed lots of other research, they'd been a note taker, they'd even stepped in and done a couple of interviews themselves on a researcher's project. So when the time came for them to do self-serve, they had all that context to draw on, and they understood what they were committing to, whereas the PM obviously didn't have any of that. So it took a fair bit of time, and it was a long game, but it paid off in the end.
So our question to you is, as you are thinking about a self-serve research program or democratizing research, how are you enabling people to build their confidence by giving them exposure and involving them in research projects before asking them to launch into a self-serve program?
So lesson number 2, something else we've learned, is that more research isn't always the answer. So earlier we touched upon the importance of effective prioritization of what researchers do and don't work on. Now, we try and prioritize researcher time, and spend it on problems where the problem clarity is low, and we need research to inform our core hypotheses. And if we've already got that, we might find it's more efficient to experiment and measure the impact, but that's really what we're looking to achieve. And this flow is just a guide that we use to help us decide which projects we should and shouldn't pick up, and also filters out questions that perhaps don't need research at all. So I just want to zoom in on one part of this, which asks the question, does previous work already answer this? And really, that brings us on to an important part of this lesson, which is making the most of what you already have. Obviously, it goes without saying, you don't want to be duplicating efforts or wasting time. So it's really important that we consider these 3 things, which are accessibility, repetition, and continuity. So what do we mean by these things?
So when we talk about accessibility in this context, we mean making the research findings accessible, findable, and searchable. So we have a database that lists every research project since 2017, and that is themed. So we've got keywords and themes tagged on there so people can easily find what they need. But even more powerful, we have a dedicated Slack channel, Monzo loves using Slack, where we post a summary of every research project. And that makes it really clear for people to find and search in there and find what they need.
Secondly is repetition. So obviously when we learn new things, we want to share them as far and wide as we can, obviously with our product teams, but also with the design disciplines, and sometimes we take them to company-wide playbacks as well. But when I first joined Monzo, I'd worked at large companies, but always with product and design teams of a much smaller scale. And I found myself wondering why I felt like at Monzo I was having to repeat myself more often than I had before. And naturally, I think, like probably a lot of us do, I put this down to something that I wasn't doing very well. So was I not communicating my insights very well? Was I not being clear enough? Were my playbacks not engaging enough? But maybe it was partly some of those things. But over time, I've realized that when you're part of a company that's growing and moving at such pace, there's so many moving parts, and naturally it means there's just more and more information for people to pass through and absorb, and more insights. And I think as researchers, if you've done the research yourself, these things are so obvious, they're so front of mind because you've lived it. But it's not going to be the same for someone who heard what you had to say in a research playback and then listened to a bunch of other new information that same day as well. So a key lesson has been to get really comfortable with repeating yourself and saying the same things to the same people in the same rooms. And even if you feel a little bit uncomfortable at the start because you feel like a broken record, just knowing that these things aren't going to embed in people's minds the first time that they hear them. So keep repeating yourself until it lands. And really that links into continuity. So this is all about carrying forward your findings, embedding them, and thinking about what do these insights really mean? How do they connect to other things? And what do we do about them? So case in point, I don't know if this looks familiar to any of you, but I know, at least for myself, sometimes we end up striking this kind of a balance, where as soon as you've done your analysis, you share your key findings, and then you move on to the next pressing, important thing. But a key learning has been to spend more time in that share and learn phase and think about how these things connect together. What do we do with these findings? What artifacts can we create to help this really land? So when you think about your research processes, where are you spending the most time? How much time are you spending in that share and learn phase after you've shared your key messages?
So the third lesson, we've spoken about prioritizing what actually gets researched and also about enabling other people to do research. But sometimes maybe you don't need research after all. And this comes from about a year ago, we had a new chief product officer join Monzo. And one of his first asks for the research team was he wanted anyone in the organization to be able to easily speak to a customer. So given this context of self-serve research, I was like, no problem. I'll show him the process. I'll show him the guides. That's fine. And while he was really happy to see this and really supportive of it, turns out that's not what he meant.
He just wanted anyone to be able to talk to a customer. Not do research, just talk. Basically, a vibe check.
So then I had to work out, how do I make this possible without requiring everyone to become a self-serve researcher and become familiar with our entire research process and tool stack, and also without depleting the researcher's ability to contact those customers for research? So what we did is partnered with an external recruitment agency. They have a platform that has all of the scheduling, all of the logistics, sending the thank you gift built in. It's a very simple recruitment brief, literally a Monzo customer. Doesn't matter, the rest doesn't matter. And it's very easy for someone to use. They just copy the template that we've created, adjust the availability to suit their schedule, hit launch, and there you go. They can have a conversation with a customer. Very straightforward.
But we also wanted to make sure that people were handling these conversations in the best way and not using it as a substitute for research or making conclusions based off just one conversation. So we put together this bank of questions which help people guide the conversation and also guide you on which topics are suitable for this kind of vibe check and which topics might need proper research instead.
And so far, the feedback's been really positive. These conversations challenge people's assumptions, take them out of their bubble, and have even sparked ideas where people go into the data to check, is this more widespread? Is this experience something I need to actually sense check a little bit? And what does our research say about this similar topic or theme? So even if you know exactly what the key jobs to be done are, if you know all the metrics around the user experience, how close do you feel to your customers? And how can you enable this feeling of closeness in an ad hoc way, like having a conversation without an agenda?
So if you're going through a period of customer growth or staff growth, how can you try and keep customers at your heart? So a quick recap of what we've spoken about today. Setting up a self-serve research program is a hefty time investment, and it's probably not going to save you time straight away, but you can set yourself up for success by thinking about, if you're a researcher, how am I enabling others to get involved in and exposed to the research process? And if you're not a researcher, thinking about how familiar you are with those processes.
And more research isn't always the answer. So think about how you can really embed the findings and socialize them. Take a step back to make connections between projects before you jump straight into the next thing.
And finally, not all customer contact needs to be research. So think about the ways in which you can foster and create that feeling of closeness without having to do formal, robust research. Thank you very much.
Saskia and Layla, thank you so much. Let's immediately jump into the Q&A.
Sure.
How did you convince management to push self-service research while still keeping dedicated researcher positions?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. I think it comes back, it's probably a multitude of things. It comes back to probably the history of Monzo as well, and what the company was founded on. And as Saskia was talking about, right from the company's inception, everyone was doing research. Everyone was trying to talk to customers as much as they can. So it's probably a bit of a cultural thing. But I think Maria mentioned this in her talk earlier as well. It does come from the top as well. So having leadership that really value this as well. And probably a bit of, sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Oh, good question. While still keeping dedicated researcher positions.
Yeah, sure. And I think when we really do focus on different types of research as well. So when we're doing our prioritization, we think about which projects are going to have the most risk, which ones are going to be the most high impact. And we can't expect non-researchers to be doing really complex projects, with very advanced methods and things like that. So we really look at what's more suitable for a researcher to pick up and what's more suitable for a non-researcher too.
And I think it's actually had like a really interesting impact where people who do their own research projects really understand the research process and really value it. And it's actually led to more demand for researchers because they also understand more what they're asking for when they ask for research work to be done. So it's actually had quite a opposite effect than diminishing research roles.
Super good. What tool or database do you use to store your insights? If you can share it, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can probably tell if you use it yourself. It's a Notion database because that's what Monzo uses. So my key philosophy for anything research tooling related really is, but especially for knowledge management, is go where people already are. You don't want to silo your knowledge. So people are in Notion, people are in Slack, so that's where we are.
Perfect, it's a nice solution. And how do you convince people in the company or in management that are not familiar with human-centered design methods, for example, or they're very skeptical towards research? I don't know if you ever encountered this, or how would you?
It's gonna maybe be
you're not familiar with this.
I don't think they'll get hired. We don't really have. I don't think we've really encountered that much.
Yeah, no, not to a huge degree, but I'd say there are still different levels of understanding, and I think probably I think we've worked with stakeholders who are more or less familiar with that. So I think bringing them along on the journey, especially if they're sort of newer to the business and having sort of an intro session and a bit of an intro to research at Monzo and this is how we do things, this is how we prioritize, and talking about how you'd want to work together. It's obviously easier at that moment when you're sort of, I guess, fresh to the business.
Yeah, so you picked them up. Nice. Which questions do we have from the audience? Here, please. Who has the mic? If you can, I can repeat the question.
So my question would be, how do you make sure that the scenario is the testing scenario is as realistic to the clients as possible? Because oftentimes, I think Maurice said that in the beginning, that if it's not your money, if it's not your numbers,
Oh,
you
that's a good one.
don't act the same as if it was.
Maybe just to quickly repeat, the question was how can we make a realistic scenario in testing, especially when it's about your own money?
Do you want to take that, or shall I?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess probably through your lines of questioning about existing behaviors as well. So digging, when you're doing evaluative testing, before you sort of jump into that, talking about how they're currently using Monzo or other financial products, like what are their current behaviors like, and asking about real behavior. And for example, if you're testing a journey in one part of the app, asking about how they're using that currently before you sort of dive into the more evaluative stuff.
I think it comes back to that problem clarity, though, as well. Like, if you have a really strong idea of what the problem is that you need to solve, then that's much easier to then work out whether this journey or whether what you've designed is actually solving this problem in a real way. And combining that, like Layla said, with the data to see how it skews in the situation. We do a fair bit of real live usability testing as well. People are on the actual app. Obviously, that comes with its own like legal considerations. It can't be as widely shared, et cetera, but we do try and balance it with the real financial use as well.
Yeah. And another thing is that sometimes user research is just not going to give you the answer, and you can get yourself to a certain level of confidence, but it gets to a point where you sort of have to put it into the wild and experiment and see how it performs as well.
Yeah.
All right, we can take 2 more questions. Yes, please. Next, I take you.
Thank you for the talk. Extremely interesting. You had this graph where you showed the balance between planning, running the test, and sharing. And I wonder, and I'm super curious, do you also share the research beforehand, what are you planning to do and why? For example, what would be the implications of results of that research? Will it have some strategic changes in the product? Things like that.
Yeah, sorry, can you just repeat the actual question?
Absolutely. So do you also share what will happen when you have the results?
Yes.
Before you even start planning or running the test?
Great question. And so ideally, yes, you should be mapping out what the outcome is, what the expected impact is, like how you're going to use these outputs and what they're going to influence. And I also think that helps with, justifying, extending that share phase a little bit more as well, because I think one of the challenges is, when there's so much to be doing and picking up, how do you justify spending a good chunk of time not doing active field work? But if you've mapped all of that out and you're saying, making a plan for that sort of learn phase, that's really, really helpful.
All right, last question over here, please. Thank you.
Hi. First, thanks for bringing research to this conference. Very much appreciated. Great talk. I wanted to ask that, so we are in a very similar situation where we are opening up research. We're starting with giving usability testing to design a lot as well. One thing for opening up further, especially for like explorative sessions and so on, is that we're a little bit afraid of, we might create a monster, let's say, of people recalling certain information from certain participants and might not be able to set this into the bigger picture, right? So that maybe there are a lot of opinions and insights floating around the company, and we then have to catch them up again and put them into perspective. So my question would be, did this happen to you? And if yes, how do you react to this?
Yeah. I'd say, I don't know if you want to talk to the sort of knowledge management side of things. And I think like a lot of what Saskia has done has been so helpful in having all the like processes and outputs all living in one place. So we have a very clear process that, even if you're a non-researcher, when you've wrapped up your study, you'll share your findings in the same place where everything else is, and having it all centralized is really key. And then what we're also trying to do more of is stepping back and doing more high-level synthesis. So taking all of the studies, especially as we're getting more and more insights coming through, and sort of building out that bigger picture, which would involve taking like these bits and pieces from everywhere and trying to like tie that into a story as well.
I think maybe you're alluding a little bit to like insight shopping, when someone goes to find an insight to validate their pet assumption or theory, or they latch onto one thing that one person said. And I think that comes into how we document our findings as well. We don't do them at the individual insight level, because that makes it so much easier for someone to just find that one thing or to skew what they act on. We do it at like an overall cohesive picture, and we'll preface it with, here are the 3 takeaways, the 3 things we need to do, and here's all the data that supports it. And that kind of helps to mitigate for that as well.
Perfect. Layla, Saskia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.